My name is Mary Muldowney, and I'm delighted to be working with the East Wall History Group yet again. And Deborah Philip wasn't the only wordsmith in the family. That was a beautiful tribute. I'm here just to senior moment, lost the word, to introduce Dr Phil Mullen. I gather he was a former punk rocker. I thought once you were a punk rocker it was it for life, but anyway, was a friend of Phil's. He worked for 37 years developing music for people who've been excluded socially. He specialises now in working with excluded children and young people at risk. He has run seminars and training in 27 countries across Europe, North and South America, Australia and Asia. And that extraordinary career has fitted him very well to speak here today.
Thanks, Sonia. Cheers, Doug.
Yeah,
I just take me a minute to set this up, yeah? Really like to thank Joe, Deborah, Steve and Pete. And everybody who's worked on this, and it's just absolutely a moment in my life to be able to talk about my friend Phil Chevron. Now, when I went to live in England in 1983, I used to hang out with Phil a lot in the flat he had above the world famous Rock On record shop where Phil worked. A wonderful, wonderful place, and we would talk about Ireland. We talk about it all the time. We talk about Irish history. We talk about the malaise that had settled over the country and was still with us and we had to live through. And we talk about Philip's dreams and my dreams for Ireland. So it was an Ireland that we dreamt of. I was surprised when I read the same title in a speech by Eamonn de Valera, who everybody will know was a figure who kind of defined a version of Ireland, in my mind, dystopian version of Ireland that meant that we all grew up with a kind of inner Stasi. People talk about the inner cop in the head, the inner Stasi. We policed our own minds, particularly in terms of our sexuality and relations to sex. We were ashamed, because of this vision. So I'm going to contrast the Ireland that we dreamed of. I'm going to contrast Phil Chevron's vision that we spoke of and that's in his songs, and De Valera's vision, which was very complete. Yeah. So we have a picture of them there. Oh, we should have. Sorry, I've got to do this myself. I forgot. We have a picture of them there. There's this austere, serious Phil Chevron. No, not him. Eamonn de Valera there on the left, and eyeing him up, as you can see in this slide, is this trickster, this cheeky, dapper, literate, exciting young man who defied that vision. And we'll talk about that vision now. It's perhaps best known in a speech most people here will know, certainly everybody will know of, on language. This is De Valera's vision, on language and the Irish nation. And this was the title of a radio address De Valera gave in 1943 on St. Patrick's Day on Radio Ireland. And you'll know some of it, and you'll be surprised at some of it. But De Valera said, I won't do that Ireland, I won't do that voice, no. That Ireland which we dreamed of would be the home of a people who valued material wealth only as a basis of right living, of a people who were satisfied with frugal comfort and devoted their leisure to the things of the spirit, a land whose countryside would be bright with cosy homesteads, whose fields and villages would be joyous with sounds of industry, the romping of sturdy children, the contests of athletic youths, the laughter of comely maidens, whose firesides would be the forums of the wisdom of serene old age. Now, of course, to me, that just conjures up John Wayne, Maureen O'Hara and Barry Fitzgerald. You know, it's just not an Ireland I knew at all. And I actually didn't want it, and neither did Phil. But it was the Ireland we were kind of subjected to in many, many ways. You know, very much you had to be the sturdy youth. I was not a sturdy youth. You had to be a comely maid. The comely maid, people are wondering here, why were they not dancing at the crossroads in that speech? What happened there? The whole idea of comely maidens dancing at the crossroads. They never were in this speech. That was never part of the speech. In fact, in the speech as spoken, De Valera never said comely maidens. He said happy maidens. I suspect comely maidens was a bit too sexually provocative for Mr. De Valera. So later in that speech, he talks about a country worthy to be called the island of saints and scholars. Now, you know, that was what we were thousands of years ago, or 1,500 years ago, whatever. But when I grew up, we were a different kind of country. We were a country full of real people who had their reality, their self, their bodies repressed under this national cloud. And the cloud was not just of De Valera's making. There was a whole generation of politicians who were into this, but De Valera was the image of the country. But he was influenced very heavily. Now, let me be clear, if I talk about the Catholic Church in Ireland, I am only referring to the Catholic Church in Ireland, not to Catholicism at all. It was a fine religion. But in Ireland, it was a brutal system, as we all know and we all still feel. And that brutality, and I should always remember to click on the thing. So you've missed the slide there. Going the wrong way, let's go the right way. Don't know how to do this. Can I ask you to click it? Would that be okay? And we click again, and one more, and there's the speech, and we'll do one more. And there's the eminence Greece that we want to talk about, which is Archbishop McQuaid, who was such an influence on De Valera and such an influence on the politics of Ireland. Now, Archbishop McQuaid did suppress in later years his knowledge from 1960 onwards of the paedophilia of some of the priests. He buried that information. There were accusations unproven against himself, and very many other things that he was involved in, such as objecting to the mother and child scheme, which would have effectively created a kind of national health system for mothers and young and children up to 16. He didn't want that. He objected to that because, and I quote, that doctors would be trained in institutions in which we had no confidence. They might be appointed as medical officers and give gynecological care not in accordance with Catholic principles. Now, we're all familiar with gynecological care in accordance with Catholic principles. I'm sure you all know about that. But it still mystifies me why people did not, under McQuaid's influence, did not get access to that. So McQuaid was influential in the creation of the Irish Constitution as then was. And the Irish Constitution was, first of all, recognised the special position of the Catholic Church. Now, that special position was it was all pervasive. It was everywhere. It was in the street, it was in the home, it was in the church, it was in our minds. And we grew up with that as a kind of police, as I've said earlier, for us. And in the Constitution, in the original Constitution, Article 41.2 declared that the state recognises that by her life within the home, woman gives to the state a support without which the common good cannot be achieved. And it goes on to say, the state shall therefore... It sounds okay, unless you actually think what it's saying. It sounds okay. The state shall therefore endeavour to ensure that mothers shall not be obliged by economic necessities to engage in labour to the neglect of their duties in the home. Still almost would sound okay unless you really understand what it says, which is you're in the home. That's it, woman's place. You're done. Those were the days. Article 41.3, all of this, the Constitution, in Dev's time, but influenced so heavily by his friend McQuaid, pledges the state to guard with special care the institution of marriage on which the family is founded. Now, I don't want to sound too much like Vin Diesel, but we all like a family now and again. It's great thing to have a family. But in the Constitution, we must protect the family against attack. Who's going to attack the Irish family? Well, two groups will certainly attack the Irish family as then was, which is gay people would, because they're not the family as envisioned in the Constitution. And unmarried mothers and their babies would attack the family. That's what we were protecting against. It was a narrow vision of a narrow world. And we grew up in that narrow world, and it was also a world where thought was banished. Serious thought was banished. No, back one, sorry, I did it at the same time as you. So one more, if that's okay. Great. Thought was banished because literature was full of pernicious filth. So the state, starting with, in the early 20s, the Committee on Evil Literature. What a wonderful title. That did fade away over time. But the Committee on Evil Literature and their followers banned many international classic authors, or at least some of their books and so forth, that we know that. But they also banned and stopped people reading Irish thought. And Irish thought was always still rich. But among the people they banned were Liam O'Flaherty, Austin Clarke, Ed O'Brien, John McGahern, Lee Dunn, Brian Moore, James Joyce, Frank O'Connor, Sean O'Whelan, that famous Irishman Aldous Huxley, I'm not sure what county he's from, Brendan Behan, Kate O'Brien, Walter Mackin, and of course you knew Graham Greene was Irish. We all knew that. But they were all banned. We didn't get access. Our ideas were narrowed. We had nobody to speak for us. We had nobody to help us. And it led to probably one of the most disastrous outcomes in peacetime of a nation. It led to some terrible outcomes. And we'll just move on to that slide if we can. It's brilliant. That's great. And I've nothing to put on that slide because I was trying to put these slides together with the headlines and with the pictures and with whatever. And I couldn't do it. And I will say to everybody, it's a little tricky the next minute or so, so apologies if we raise difficult issues, but we need to. I remember when I was here, a 15-year-old girl dying in a field, giving birth, because she knew no better, and none of us knew any better. We remember the Magdalen laundries. We remember the Bon Secours and Bethany homes. We remember thousands of babies in unmarked graves. You know, that was the legacy of De Valera's vision as it was made live in this country. That was the legacy, and the legacy of the suppression of the knowledge of paedophile priests. Many people here will have lived through that generation and know how iniquitous this all was. And we were prisoners of that. We couldn't escape from that. It was affected our minds. We were all ashamed of our own bodies, of our own selves. Who was going to help us out of that? Our writers were banned and banished. There was nothing on the media. We had our own ideas, but how would we escape from that? And the people who actually, if you don't mind, that's great, thanks, helped us out of that, yeah? And these guys here, two of whom I'm delighted to say are still here today in this room, the radiators from space who had a different vision from De Valera's vision, yeah? They had a vision of anarchy, yeah? They had a vision of disruption. They had a vision of going against the status quo. And in fact, their vision was, I don't know if you play guitar or anybody here, but a Telecaster is a very precious and very beautiful thing. So they must have been fairly angry because they decided they were going to smash their Telecaster through the television screen because they didn't like what was going down. They didn't like what was happening and they wanted to change it. And it was extraordinarily joyous to be part of the generation that had that coming out of the radio, and you thought, wow, we're really making a change here. It's amazing. Just quoting from Wikipedia, yeah, about punk culture, and that's not an oxymoron. They say it's largely characterized by anti-establishment views, by the promotion of individual freedom. And I think that's the thing we got from Phil's writing and the radiators, the idea that we were free. We were free as individuals. The DIY, do-it-yourself ethic, everybody had creative capacity within them. And the ethos, it says here, is primarily made up of beliefs such as non-conformity, non-conformity, not going with the flow, anti-authoritarianism, and also, strangely, anti-corporatism, anti-consumerism. So in one sense, the two visions, De Valera's and Chevron's, do cross over. Anti-corporate greed, direct action, and not selling out. Now, people think that punk rock, and we will move on, people think that punk rock, just kind of arose of the economic and social malaise of the 1970s. And excuse me, that's a little pixelated, the one on the left, but actually it didn't. Chevron said to me, punk was merely a continuation or rebirth of the Dada art movement that started in a little small side street in Zurich in 1915 in the Cabaret Voltaire, Hugo Ball, Tristan Tzara, and others, giving birth to a movement that said basically 400 years of post-Renaissance civilization, Michelangelo, Leonardo, we don't want anything to do with it. We want to destroy it because, as Dada said, we now have all the male children of Europe killing each other on the battlefields of Europe. Our art is useless. Our art is not worth anything. It's a bourgeois art and we're against it. So this was a forerunner of the punk rock ideas, Chevron's ideas, and it involved various different art forms. We can see on the one on the left that is collage. Now, collage was a relatively new, wasn't that popular, very much popularized by Dada. And in that collage, if I can just have a look at the title, wonderful title, it's cut with the kitchen knife Dada through the last Weimar beer belly cultural epoch of Germany. So they were kind of against certain things there in that one. And on the right, there's an even more controversial piece of art that's gone on to influence art for 100 years now. This is, of course, Fountain It's a ready-made, as they would call it, or an objet trouvé. It's a found object. In fact, it was a paid-for object. He bought a urinal. Marcel Duchamp bought the urinal, signed it, Ormut, and distributed it as a work of art. And I think it's fantastic. Now, me personally, I'd prefer Raphael, the School of Athens. I prefer Van Gogh. I prefer Goya to look at or to hang on my wall. But the aesthetic of putting a urinal there and saying this is art is more challenging. It makes me think more. I love that, and I love that about Chevron. I'm going to move on to a little more on Dada, because they had a lot of different, and these were influential on Phil, a lot of different forms. So we talked about collage, photo montage here. We see on the left the business man, as it was, turned into a hyena, ravaging the battlefields of Europe. You know, it's a very obvious political picture. On the right, we see Hitler with his unique, I don't know if you know, he had a unique Hitler salute. It was like, that was different to everybody else's, and he has that salute up there and is taking money from Siemens, Krupp's, Hugo Boss, etc., all those people who profiteered on war. So that was John Hartfield. Photo montage really made that an art form coming out of Dada into the Weimar times in Germany. But Cento, or Cento, I'm not sure of the pronunciation, was a form which Chevron used, which takes lines from poems, lines from books, lines from songs, and decontextualizes them and then recontextualizes them, puts them into a different form to get a different meaning. And it's the first masterpiece we'll talk about is Song of the Faithful Departed, where those references and taking those little lines and just tearing them to shreds is all over it. This graveyard hides a million secrets. By the way, graveyards, darkness, secrets, underground, suppressed, all that type of imagery comes from Chevron, and I believe it comes from the idea that we all had to suppress our real selves in that Ireland. This graveyard hides a million secrets, and the trees know more than they will tell, but the ghosts of the saints and scholars, de Valera's famous saints and scholars, will haunt you in heaven or in hell, rattled by the glimmer man, the bogey man, the holy man, and living in the shadows of a gunman, rattled like the coppers in your greasy till, rattled until time stood still. Look across your shoulder and the school bell rings. I presume that's referencing Brendan Behan. Another day of made-to-measure history. That's Chevron was very strong about. We could create a different history of Ireland. Well, I don't mind if your heroes all have wings, but your terrible beauty is torn. He's smashing that Telecaster through the history of Ireland, through the fact of Ireland. He says, let's tear it down. And later in the second verse, he talks about the heroines of some of his songs, the girls from the Kips, the prostitutes. I mean, we're talking about Monto, which at the turn of the 19th, 20th centuries was the biggest brothel area in Europe. And he says, the girls from the Kips proclaimed their love for you. When you stumbled in, they knew you had a shilling or two, but they cursed you on Sundays and holy days of abstinence when you all stayed away. Now, the genius is, have you ever come across a song ever in your life that used the term holy days of abstinence? It's fantastic, fantastic. Tears it apart, and it goes right direct to the center of Catholic hypocrisy here. Yeah, you go to the whorehouse during the week, but on the holy days you'll stay away. You know, it's a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant line. And as he says about Ireland, there's nothing too sick that it can't be eased by the devil's holy water and rosary beads. Yeah, so yeah, I've said what I'm said about that song. It's a work of genius that tears the country apart, tears it all down like Dada did, like Punk did. We're going to move on. We're actually going to move on 2 slides. That's okay. I'm sorry for making you do this. You're a gentleman. And we have the cover of the Radiators' wonderful second album, Ghost Town. And this brings us from Dada and the influence of Dada on Chevron as a writer to the influence on the Radiators of the Weimar Republic and particularly cabaret culture. The Weimar is that period of time between, more or less, or certainly 1919 onward, the period of time between the end of the First World War and Hitler's ascension as Chancellor of Germany. And it was this strange little time. We see the front cover is from almost the last scene of Nosferatu, one of the greatest horror movies of all time. Max Schreck, the infamous Max Schreck, going up the staircase as the vampire to meet his lover. He'll make love to the lover in a vampiric way, and then when daylight comes, he's gone. Yeah, and you can see the symbolism in that. He's a vampire. He shouldn't be. He can only exist at nighttime. He hasn't got the right to be there in the daytime, and then he is destroyed and disappears. So we will talk a little bit about Weimar now, if that's okay. On moving on, beautiful. Weimar was, of course, in Germany. It was a time of great financial upheaval. We see the picture in the middle, the match seller there by Otto Dix, where the veteran, disabled veteran, is trying to sell matches, and the rich people, you can see by their shoes, are just walking away. And above ground, there was that, and there was also the war, the street battles between the Freikorps, as they were the right wing, that became the Nazis essentially, and the Communist Party. This was all going on, great turmoil. But however, underground, there was a whole other scene going on. There was the brothel scene, as celebrated again by Salon on the left, by Otto Dix, and also there was the cabaret scene. We can see here a gay cabaret from the Weimar times in Berlin. And you know it in the film Cabaret, you're aware of the creative freedom that cabaret had. And the Radiators took this on very strongly on their second album and created one of the great characters in song, Kitty Ricketts. And Kitty Ricketts, you can see, you're really looking, I think, at Marlena there underneath the street lamp. And Kitty Ricketts is a mythical figure. She's a hoe. And she's the heroine of the song and probably the album as well, in my interpretation. Anyway, we'll go one more slide if that's okay now. We'll talk about the lyrics here. And I need to put my glasses on. And again, these lyrics are Catholic, Irish Catholic imagery all the time. But now he uses the idea of the underground and being subverted and subversive to turn things round a bit. He says, the decent folk on All Souls' Night light penny candles for the sweet repose. Very, very well known to us that those two lines would be. And then he undercuts that in brackets. It's not even allowed to be in a proper sentence. Easy fortunes for fortune tellers, quick abortions in dingy cellars. Yeah. So the reality of Ireland always undercuts de Valera's vision of Ireland. Yeah. Such simple faith is really all it takes to rid the land of snakes. God speed them on their way to hell, but it could never break Kitty Ricketts' spell, because Kitty Ricketts is sexuality. She's a carnal joy. No matter how you try to suppress it, it's there. De Valera will always fail. She's handsome, she's pretty, she's the girl not from Belfast, but from Dublin City. Please, can you tell me who is she? And we'll get into that in a sec, who is she? But she's a carnal joy for night town boys. So he's again referencing Joyce there. It's the same idea we had in the Cento. This is all Cento all over it, that technique of bringing in lines from other songs, from other poems, yeah? You're not there, Kitty Ricketts, you're not there, but I can touch your hair. You're a ghost, but I don't care. So as I say, the ghostliness, the suppression, the underground. And who is she? And we go on and I just ask you a question, because I think she's a mythical figure. Is she any, in this next slide, of these four people? Is she all of them? Is she Molly Malone, that the ghost wanders through the streets at night, yeah? Is she the other famous Kitty, whose libido, whose carnality destroyed a vision of a free Ireland, Kitty O'Shea? Is she Kathleen as Kitty? Yeah, De Valera's virginal Kathleen Ní Húlahan, this unspoiled comely maiden, has now riddled with illness, with rickets, is now can't suppress her sexuality, but is used and abused. Ireland is used and abused by the bourgeoisie. Or is she Anna Livia Pluribel, James Joyce's character in Finnegan's Wake, according to Encyclopedia Britannica, who symbolizes the eternal and universal female? Is she everything? Is she Ireland? Great song, brilliantly put together. We'll skip the next slide and go on 2 slides to that one and look at the last song I want to talk about, the later masterpiece of Phil, which is, as we know, Ireland's first gay song. It's interesting today, you know, how proud that man would have been to have his art celebrated on the day of Pride, Under Clery's Clock, a place we all know well. And Under Clery's Clock stays with the idea of a darkness, stays with the idea of suppression, stays with the idea of shame and negative emotions, but looks for, yearns for, longs for the light, yeah, before it had come. Burgh Quay at night, in this dark and stinking place, urges I can't fight with a boy without a face. Strange as it seems, all I want is to embrace by the streetlight, just like other lovers do, without disgrace. And then later he goes on, and this is a line only Irish people, only Dublin people know. The next bus to Onlar is his for sure. And then we have the Nosferatu, I believe, reference. I believe it's a Nosferatu reference. Cold morning light, he's gone. Nosferatu has to disappear with the dawn. His place is only in nighttime, with only shame to take his place. So Chevron comes out in this song. I mean, he'd come out before, but comes out publicly in this song and says, we're tired of this shame. We want to smash this up. We're tired of De Valera's vision. It's a dystopian vision. We want a reality where we can be ourselves, we can be our sexual selves, we can be our loving selves, we can be our natural selves. And it's his gift. It's his great gift to Ireland. And he would have loved, if we go to the next slide, the slide after this. He would have loved to be part of contemporary Ireland that's shaking it all off, where May 2015, the Constitution was amended. Yeah, and Ireland can now provide that marriage is recognised irrespective of the sex of the partners. And we see the celebrations here today. We are a contemporary country. We are a country who's healed to some extent. New generations don't have to go through what the old generations went through. I adored Phil Chevron. Everybody who knew him did, because he was a hero of art. I'd like to finish with a quote from a Dada dancer, somebody who was a dancer in Dada times, who went on to be a dancer and performance artist in the Weimar Cabaret scene. And I want to change one word in the quote from danced to sang, because it's from Valeska, Gerd, from danced to sang, because I think this sums up Chevron, what he did. I sang all of the people that the upright citizen despised. Whores, pimps, depraved souls, the ones who slipped through the cracks. Folks, it's been a huge honor to talk briefly about my hero. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.